the essence of what makes these designs really special and really what makes the end result really special is that you're getting this incredibly complex detail to each and every garment, whether it be a tiny little bead, the way things are knotted, the way they blow in the wind. You're getting all that because of the mass amounts of testing that we did to get the costumes understandable to the visual effects people and the hands-on experience of actually giving them a sample.
I see you.
Damn right you do.
Hello and welcome to a special episode of the Hollywood Reporters Behind the Screen, in partnership with 20th Century Studios, featuring artisans who helped to create Avatar, Fire and Ash, from the Oscar-winning filmmaker James Cameron. I'm your host, THR contributing editor, Stacey Wilson Hunt. My guest today is costume designer Deb Scott. Hi, Deb. Welcome. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. And I've had such a blast speaking to members of your team. And I can't wait to learn more about the costumes in Avatar, Fire and Ash. But I want to go back to when you first worked with James Cameron. And this was on Titanic, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you won an Oscar for your work in that incredible movie. I've never forgotten Kate Winslet's gorgeous blue and white suit she wears to get on the ship. Absolutely stunning. And I want to know what struck you as unique about the way James approached costumes on that film that then has helped to inform your process with him in Avatar.
Well, basically what it gets down to with him is that, he's pretty much an all or nothing kind of filmmaker. So, and by that, I mean, he goes big and he understands the complexity of his whole movie and therefore demands sort of everyone rise to that level of performance. And, that was a very historically driven drama, even though the characters are fictional. The time and the place and a lot of the people we were representing were historical. So you really, the deep dive into sort of the methodology of it. And, you wouldn't, on Titanic, you don't necessarily refer to it as the science of it, but it becomes kind of the way we work. It's a very scientific, concept-driven proof of concept. And you start there and you build a very, very big world for him. So, he sees things kind of outside the screen, so you're working a lot larger than what it may end up being. But yeah, it's a whole world. And Avatar was basically the same way.
Right. There's a guiding light, a mythology to all these worlds, whether they be sort of, quote, in the sci-fi space or in this case, a historical epic.
Mm-hmm. He's told me this many times where he sets kind of a very kind of simple love story against some historic or grand background. And you can see that in all of his films. And I think it's kind of the secret to reaching an audience in a very succinct way, because they really dial into the storytelling and then are very enveloped in the world that they're getting to see visually. So I think it's very unique in terms of the directors. For sure.
I'm trying to think, what was the love story in Terminator? Who was in love with whom in that one?
Yeah, I know. Well, I didn't do that movie, so I can't be responsible for it.
Right.
But it is, but it still has that kind of, the relationship of so funny. It's like, even if they're 9 foot tall blue people or robots or whatever, they still have all those human components.
Great. And I have to say, a through line in his films, great female characters too. I mean, every single movie, an iconic female character, which I think really brings in this other half of the audience, because I know I like to see a killer woman character.
Yeah. He loves strong female characters. They kind of guide most of the movies, I think.
Yeah, no, you're so right. So in terms of Avatar, I think, and I'm no expert in costume design, but I have to imagine this is one of the most unique processes in the history of costume design in terms of your task of creating these costumes essentially twice. So can you walk me through that process? It's just absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, it's very, very unique. I mean, I don't think that many other designers or many other films approach it like we approach it. For this particular film and these films, these Avatar films, we're sort of straddling two complete worlds of design. One is you're designing and making things in the exact same old way that you used to on every single live action movie you ever worked on. However, it's opened up this incredible world of Pandora where your imagination can run wild. It's fantasy, it's science fiction. I mean, Jim doesn't really like to call it science fiction because even with the human component in our films are very approachable and very, it's not like crazy spacesuits and stuff. It's pretty approachable to what we would consider accessible now, with a little bit of a twist, but really based in the human element, humanity as we know it, the history of our world as we know it. And then it works since I do then take it into the virtual space. And people have done this before. There's been other, I would say, animated films. Like, we don't call this really an animated film. This is an intense performance capture film. But you could, in fact, take a drawing on a piece of paper and give it to the visual artists, the visual effects artists, and let them create it, right? You could do that. But that's not how we do it. Because that's not the essence of what makes these designs really special and really what makes the end result really special to your eye as a viewer is that you're getting this incredibly complex detail to each and every garment, whether it be a tiny little bead, the way things are knotted, the way they blow in the wind, how heavy something feels. You're getting all that because of the mass amounts of testing that we did to get the costumes understandable to the visual effects people and the hands-on experience of actually giving them a sample. Like, this is what it is, right? There's no mistake about it. A drawing can always be interpreted. There's always interpretation. And the fact that, John especially was a real cheerleader for this process in the costume department. And it's very unique. In the film, it's very unique. So in the world, it's hugely unique in terms of costume designers worldwide. They don't, it's hard to explain it to people and hard for people to sort of grasp why we do what we do. But it's the way to get as close to a live element in a CG film, basically. That's the only way to do it. Because you could draw a lot of things and 6 different people see it as a different thing, right? It's a very, very in-depth scientific approach to getting hands-on, handcrafted, and especially this movie, it's not like you have a kind of conventional film and then are CGing it. We do that with some of the uniforms, but you have very complex world-built, working with production design, building worlds, and coming up with the techniques that we use to make the garments.
It's so fascinating. And I know you did motion and water tests on some of these designs. Are you dressing the actors? So in this case, Zoe and Sam, are they actually putting on the clothes and you're submersing them, or you're putting wind on their faces to see how the garments blow around? What is the process?
It really depends on what we're using it for. And sometimes the performance capture, while we're doing that, we use a lot of what I would call stage pieces, so that you have a reference for what the real thing might look like, because you can't use a real garment in performance capture. It blocks the markers and there's, 8,000 little dots all over the actors. But a material that allows the cameras to see through it so that anything an actor interacts with, like a shawl, where they could pull it up against it, so instead of faking it, which you could fake it, right? James Cameron doesn't fake a thing. So you got to have it there. And Varung's headdress is another interesting one, because that's not only for reference, but also like if she turns her head and, you're getting camera angles and lighting angles and just taking up space. So you're working in that kind of, weird half truths, I guess, in there. But then long after the actors are gone, when the costumes are getting very much designed and built, because it takes a really long time to make these things. Everything's handcrafted and one of a kind, and so they're pretty. It's a pretty lengthy process, but then we take to the proof of concept, which is again something like a Varung headdress, where You're like, well, how do you get it in her hair and not have it blow off when she's zooming around on, they fly real fast. And I did it with Una. I've also done it with other of our troop members where you actually put something similar, tie it into their hair, weave it into someone's hair, and put them in front of a Ritter fan going really, really fast. So you're like, is that thing going to just literally fly off her head or take her hair out at the roots? Or so, but in the process of doing that, it's a lot of experimentation, but they got a lot of good reference out of things like that, because even when Richie would do the footage at slow motion, and you could literally see like just the slightest bit of that, or, so it informs the CG artist, because they don't know. The simulation is all based in reality, just like the actors' movements are based in reality.
Right. And you mentioned Varong, who is, of course, Una Chaplin's character, and she's a new addition to Fire and Ash. She's my favorite character, I have to say, just stunning. I love the red accents, and she's just so beautiful and evil too, but combination.
Yeah.
Yes. And in terms of new characters, I'd like to talk about the Wind Traders, who are also new in this installment. Tell me what aspects of their dress you most enjoyed creating.
Well, they were really fun. They were kind of like, because they're more joyful, and they're not, in this installment, they're not in it for a lot of screen time, but their presence is really felt and important, because they have this sort of joyful storytelling, world traveling. We're going to fly around and make everybody happy and bring things and sell things and gossip with all the other clans on Pandora. And the fact that you don't really know much about them, except that they live on this big giant ship, right? And they travel around. So all the clans so far, and I'm not, you never know how many clans are on Pandora, because we don't really know about the whole planet yet. But every clan so far kind of adheres to a couple of the same rules. They're all, and it's much like Earth. I always say it's exactly the rules that we have on Earth, when you think about how, for instance, hoop skirts, all of a sudden you'd be seeing them worldwide, even back in those times. So you see certain kinds of things, I think, all around Pandora. That's how I've established it, that the Na'vi people they weave, they make things with their hands, they make things from their environments. So it's just a matter of having kind of that rule book and then taking it off in different directions. And some of them, like the Wind Traders, are a really good example of, again, sort of a scientific approach, in that they live on these gondolas, and they mostly live really high up in the sky, so it gets cold up there. Or to the capes.
Right. Which are very chic, I must say, very stylish.
Who doesn't love a cape, a nice cape? It's not like our Mekayina clan it was always warm, right? So they sort of scantily dressed, but it was an opportunity to work in more clothing. We wove our own cloth. We did everything like they would have done it, big looms and sometimes finger weaving. So that was really, really fun. And looking at the colors that they may have seen in their environment, that was kind of where I started from them. Everybody's a little bit like that, right? Material wise, they could get stuff from everywhere because they touched down at different places. For me, the colors were really important, because it's not only the colors of the sky, but that kind of very much saturated colors that we get at a sunset or a sunrise, and using a lot of jewel tones, and using a lot of, I've tried to, as the installments have gone on and getting into some of these new clans, I've gotten very interested in my own work of representing motion in the garment. Not only that, it started, of course, you have this cape that just moves around, like, so it does all that, which is what the wind does, which is what the sky does. When you think of being outdoors, it makes sense. Trees bend to the wind, and, so you have all that, but you also have a very visual design on it that is meant to sort of bring your eye along with the fabric. So there's motion in the graphic, there's motion in the piece itself.
It's so interesting. I spoke to Ruth Carter recently about her work on the Black Panther movies, and there's such an overlap, which is interesting, the infusion of Indigenous designs into this fantasy space. What do you think is distinct about the impact of the Indigenous I guess, influences on the Avatar storytelling at large?
I think it's huge. And I think because we are inventing our own indigenous peoples, and you can't really make that up successfully. I mean, I suppose you can, but not in Jim's world, So again, it had to do with a tremendous amount of research of all sorts of indigenous peoples, literally worldwide on our world today. Because it's easy to say, well, I'm going to make them have wings. You could make them do anything like that, right? You could make stuff up. But if you do that, the authenticity that you're trying to create in the design and in the movie will fall down eventually. So in this research of all these different kinds of clans and peoples worldwide, it literally wouldn't matter what I was looking for. If I was looking for when I was designing the tattoos, and I would say, okay, what's that look like to people in Antarctica and people in Southeast China and people, and we're so lucky today because we do have the internet. It may not always be completely truthful, but you can dig deep and get pictures, a lot of pictures and a lot of written text, about different kinds of indigenous peoples. But that research, it really reminds you that somehow peoples everywhere come together in the most unique ways. And when I would get stuck in a design, and I was like, oh, I'd really, really like to have some flowers on it. It's like, well, what kind of flowers? First of all, we're on Pandora, so they can be anything. And then I would look at many, 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 many books on flowers and just like have it fill your imagination and then go away and make a flower. So the research doesn't stop.
Wow. And there's a universality to all of that, I think, is sort of what unites us as people, whether we be real humans or fantasy humans. I think to your point, there's a groundedness to your designs that I think that I can relate to, even though I'm certainly not Navi.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's because too, like when you really think about it, that any kind of people throughout time, right? No matter, even if it's in Western cultures where people wear a tremendous amount of clothing in the 1800s, or that people decorate themselves. This is the concept of wearing clothing. And in movies, we're relaying character as well. But in terms of people, it's a way to show this is who I am.
So true.
Right? So everybody thinks, I should wear this blouse today, or I should, so it goes back to the same principles forever, since I think, the world was created. So we just sort of try to carry on that, because why not? It's the basis of who a culture is.
So true. And for those who may not know, and I feel especially tied to some of your credits, including Back to the Future and E.T., it's so overwhelming to think that you were actually on those sets. What an experience. And I think about Marty's vest, and I think about Elliot's red hoodie. And not only did they contribute so much to the story, but they are literally the most iconic pieces of clothing from those films, at least in my opinion. And I want to know, what do you think is the secret to creating or even envisioning an iconic piece of clothing for a character? How do you know when you have found something that is the perfect addition to, in this case, Steven Spielberg's vision?
Well, thank you for that, first of all.
And of course, Robert Zemeckis, too, for Back to the Future. Don't want to leave him out.
That's such a good question, because I don't think that you know that. I think what you do is you strive for some kind of, and for me, it usually comes down to some kind of intuition. The vest, perhaps in Back to the Future, was generated partially from a comedy, from a joke that was needing to be written. Some piece that needed to set him apart from in the 50s, right? Something that...
When he walks into the diner and the guy says, "Did you jump ship?" Because he thinks he's a sailor.
Yeah. Like I said, a life preserver. It's like, okay.
Right.
But, so it needed that, so it had to be something that set him apart. But the idea of something becoming iconic, I think the things that I think of, and you can think of, Audrey Hepburn in her black dress, or that it's a complete meeting of a bunch of things. One is a story that people love, a character that resonates somehow. Henry Thomas in E.T. resonates, I think, for every single human being who watches that performance. So the screenwriting, the directing, and everything coming together in a moment, and then the movie becoming popular enough that it stays in the popular culture. And you have kids today that, they didn't see E.T. when they were little, but they do now, and people go to film fests or see it in a theater and everyone's wearing red hoodies. It has to be some kind of alignment of a whole bunch of things, but I think it becomes really a treasured element to a look into a character in a particular time and place.
So incredible. And I've spoken to other costume designers about the challenges of managing a workroom. It's not always an easy process, especially, and for most artists, you're a solitary worker on your own for so many years. And then suddenly it's kind of like a showrunner. Suddenly you're running a writer's room. Mm-hmm. But internally, you're just an artist. You're just a writer. You're just a costume designer. What has been your biggest learning curve in managing large groups of people who are working under you, but also relinquishing control to them along the way?
Absolutely. I mean, honestly, it's like, I think the more secure you get in your own work, and I think people would probably say this about anything, the more secure you are in your work, the easier it is for you to relinquish some control, because there's no way that I can watch over the heads of, if I'm, supervising 45 different people, every single thing they do, right? But I think you hire like-minded people. I work really hard. I like to hire people who work really hard. And there's a passion in the workroom, on the set, from the people who are really invested in the project, invested in their work, and really respectful to my work and what I can give them. And I think really one of the things that gets down to, too, is one of the best things is the ability to communicate. Because on Avatar, it was very particular because no one was allowed to read the script. Except me.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
So,
no. You mean no one in your workspace was allowed to read the script?
Mm-mm.
Wow.
So, and I wasn't really allowed, I couldn't tell plot points. I couldn't, so we'd get to a certain design or a piece, and I'd find myself, I really honed my skills of how to express myself, that how many adjectives will it take to describe exactly how I want this sea cape to look, and so, right. and I carry that on with the visual effects artists, because sometimes you're over computer and you're like, they're showing you something back to you that they've interpreted of your work, and you're like, it's too heavy. It needs to be lighter. It needs to be fluffy. It needs to be, so the word usage is very particular, and it's the best, the ability to be descriptive for myself became very, very important, because I would have to say, okay, look, even the designers on the project, when we would get all together and we were doing the Ash people per se, or any character, but the Ash people, we had a lot of meetings together where I would say like, okay, here's the deal, guys. This is who they are. This is what their materials are. This is how they fight. This is how they look. This is, they use paint, so it's really building it from kind of a conversation. And you start to
it almost sounds like a parlor game where you have to describe something without using the words.
I can't tell you, So yeah, it's really key to be able to communicate succinctly, because then people go, I get it. And then the most beautiful part of the process is that when people then take what you give them, and like I say, are very passionate about what they do, and they go do something and bring it back to you and give you something like a little glimmer of like, oh, wait a second. That's interesting. Maybe we take it this direction. And I would always say in the workroom would say, I love that, but not for this. Let's put it to the side, and I'm going to use it someplace else. I'm going to use that idea that you just made with your hands, and it would spark another direction for something else, perhaps. So nothing's wasted. But the ability that people have to bring you something back, like I heard what you said, And, I heard that even when people shop for you on a contemporary movie, like I'll say, here's the character and all the rules and look for this, this, and this. And really good shoppers will often bring back just something a little off, and sometimes like, wow, that is such a good idea. That's exactly what I think, that's the direction forward. It's a wonderful give and take between people.
Absolutely. And then they have the foresight to bring back the red hoodie or the red vest, and maybe something that you or the director hadn't thought of.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And is there a moment in the Avatar storytelling arc where you have seen one of your designs rendered on screen for the first time and you thought, wow, I know I imagined this, but I couldn't have imagined the magic that they were going to create in the final product? Was there a moment where you were just blown away by what they were able to achieve?
Yeah, I mean, they are the actual way that they do it, the actual way they get from the garment to the screen, it's way over my head. I mean, there's two things going on there. One is which I give them what I think is the perfect element, like, okay, here's your loincloth. It better look like this. It better look exactly like this, right? So they have something to strive for. They have a level of what I would consider the level to do. So, and in that process, like some of the things, are difficult, and some of the things I've asked them to do through the process have been difficult. There was a very early on, John Lando, our dear John Lando and Jim had they wanted me to stay on through all this post so that I supervise the virtual artists as well. And that's for a reason, because you have to have like the guiding light, right? The voice of here's what I want. And again, maybe they'll bring something new, but they don't often do that because they're really trying to get perfect what I give them. So, but sometimes, you'll be worried about like, I had a couple of bad incidents for myself where I'm like, okay, clearly the weaving of this one little thing was too complicated. And that I would have to simplify it down a little to get my point across, if that makes sense.
Sure.
You can get a lot of visual noise and things. And I wasn't really prepared for that. And I thought that, because I'm creating all this stuff and it's unbelievable that we can actually create it, that it's, how did that, looking at all the stuff and seeing how it turned out. And that's really the beauty of seeing the real pieces, if you ever get to see them in person. And then turning over your babies to be redone in a different format, and the complexities of all that. And it's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of hard work to keep them on track with my vision. But sometimes like the Varong battle outfit in the end of film 3, she has this cloak that's made of all these iridescent feathers. I loved them. I thought they just had their exact, and of course I can touch the things, so it gives a whole other element that moviegoers can't have. But okay. So I'm like, oh, this is amazing. These will be great. It's gonna, and I worked out. I knew they could. By that time, it was one of the last things we made, and I knew that we could work out the movement of it. I wasn't worried about that. I was worried because the feathers are so iridescent and so black in nature. But when they shine, you get green, you get purple, you get brown, you get all these colors. And when they showed me their first pass of that in lighting, I was like, yeah, wow, you guys are amazing.
Wow.
Because it looked just like
I remember that piece. That piece is quite stunning now. I'm remembering. It's really just incredible. And I did want to reach out and touch it. It looked so touchable.
It's so soft. It's so soft and floaty. It's amazing. Yeah, but you forget that, you really want people to, that's one of our, our senses, the touch. And so.
Well, it sounds like what you've described is a lot of compromise and a lot of deal making along the way, where you have your ideal scenario and then you bring it to the experts and they say, we love this, but we may have to make a few adjustments, which sounds like filmmaking, really the entire process of filmmaking.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not one, well, if it's anyone's vision, it's your director's, right? But right. Yeah, they could turn to me and say, look, we were really having a hard time getting that, because all the garments that I make are made for humans, and all the things they make are made for 9-foot tall blue people. So their proportions of their body, everything's different. So that's the first thing we start out is trying to reproportion the garment. And sometimes it's just like when we first developed the Mekayina people where they have that thicker neck and wider arms and things wouldn't work as well. And so we'd really have to go in and sort of reconstruct it like, well, then is it this proportion? Is it slightly lower to get through, So it was like being in a hands-on workroom. And if you had a real tall blue person standing next to you, but yeah,
if only, right?
Yeah. But it's a lot of that. It's a lot of, there weren't too many things. They didn't ever really, I gotta say, God love them. They never really turned to me and said, no, they would go, it's hard. It's going to be hard. Or would you consider this perhaps, so we compromised, but yeah. And I had to follow their guidance because they know what they're doing. I don't do that. I don't draw on a computer. I don't understand all the things. So, I learned a tremendous amount from them through the process.
Well, it's clear that everyone on this film and this whole series of films are not people who shy away from challenges. So that's very evident through this work.
That's true.
Well, Deb, I want to thank you so much for your time again. The work is just so stunning. I've learned so much speaking to you today, and I really hope people take the time to understand just exactly how much you poured into this process, because it really does show on screen. So congratulations to you.
Thank you for that. I think so. I hope so. I hope the audiences really like it.
Oh, I think they will. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank Deb so much for joining me on this special episode of the Hollywood Reporters Behind the Screen. Tune in for more conversations with other artisans from Avatar, Fire, and Ash. I'm Stacey Wilson Hunt. Thank you so much for listening.